Greetings, everyone. We're so excited you're here tonight for 3 Things I Learned from Comics, Not Comedy. This is a series of lectures that are sponsored by the Hunt College Union and the Office of Student Success. We're delighted you're here tonight. We have a fabulous panel. I'm so excited to learn more about comics. Rob, why don't you introduce our panelists to us?
Dr. Grau, thank you so much, and good evening, everyone, from wherever you are. I'm Rob Tebow, and let me introduce our panelists for tonight. First, let's give it up for Owen Conklin. He's the Assistant Director on Graduate Admissions, and alongside that, he's also a father, an avid gamer, and a comic geek. That's right. Give it up for Owen. All right. Next, I have an alumni, Stefan M., a.k.a. Master Graphite, class of 2016, a story artist and occasionally a poet who's determined to work in animation. His work consists of stories inspired by the magical lore and culture of the African diaspora. He hopes that his career can be broaden that diversity in animation, which is severely lacking. Currently, he's in an internship with the Cartoon Network and under the tutelage of a staff storyboard artist that was on the show We Bear Bears. He also has a launch of merchandise at a website for comical art, stickers, and clothing. And we look forward to seeing more and hearing more about that tonight as well. Next, also an alumni. From 2008, a storyteller, a comic book writer based in Brooklyn, New York. He launched his first series, Dream Crasher, in 2015 with artist and frequent collaborator Reed Olson. They've since published 6 of the 12 planned chapters and have run 2 successful Kickstarter campaigns. The first collected edition of the series was released in the early 2018, and he also writes for Geeks Out blog and is an organizing member of the Brooklyn Speculative Fiction Writers. These are our guests tonight. Give it up for all our guests. Studio participation. All right, well, the rules are simple. We're going to hear from each one of you, and we're going to hear 3 things you've learned from comics, not comedians, not comedy. We're talking comics. So why don't we begin first with Daniel Stalter? What do you know? What do you got to share?
Okay, so the first of the 3 things that I learned about through doing comics and making them is to start small and work your way up. So one of the things I've heard frequently is you don't start with your epic. I didn't hear that before I started with my epic. And so Reed and I launched Dream Crasher we started working on it back in 2010. We didn't get it we didn't get the first chapter out and released until 2015, and we are still obviously working on it. So one of the things I learned is that it's better to start small and work your way up incrementally. And we learned this the hard way by completely scrapping the first version of the first chapter completely and starting over from scratch. And what I've learned since then is the better way to do it is to kind of approach it from small, short comics. Like you can do 5 to 8 pagers, learn a lot about the ways in which page real estate works. And so I've done that with a few shorts, and I've been expanding my portfolio. I've got this zine of my recent stuff that I've done with that. And it's just a good way to find out for me, it was a good way to find out who I am as a writer and try and experiment with new things without such a huge, comics are, they take a long time to make and they're very expensive to make. And so starting small cuts that down a lot and still allows you to grow and learn. And I'm still learning 10 years into starting with, I want to make a comic. And I hope that never stops. So my other major lesson is that you will never be everyone's favorite. And that is a good thing. I have learned through pitching my series at conventions that who to lean into and who to let walk away. And I think that's an important lesson is that you're not going to be for everyone. If you're making the story that you want to make, it's not going to be everyone's thing, and that's okay. You're never going to please everybody. When I pitch Dream Crasher, for instance, the pitch for it is, it's a story about a group of children who survive a bizarre cataclysmic event. and find themselves in a strange new world filled with beasts made from human parts and interdimensional parasites that want to feed on children's dreams. When I mention interdimensional parasites, I can tell by looking at a person's face whether or not it's for them or very much not for them. And it's great because I can laugh it off when they like, that's good, that's nice, but not for me. And not take it personally, because there are plenty of things that people love that aren't for me. And another thing I've learned because I have a lot of writer friends that deal with getting negative reviews or negative feedback on your stuff. One of the kind of fun things that I like to do is pull up one of my favorite books on like Goodreads or Amazon, and I go find a 1-star review of that. There's somebody out there that hates your favorite book. And they're well within their rights to do so. And it's just a good reminder that like even your favorite thing that you would love to emulate in some way and pay homage to is also something that somebody couldn't make it through or actively despises maybe. And that's just kind of the nature of art, and it's actually, I think, a beautiful thing in it, and that's what gives us such a diversity of different ways to do it. We wouldn't want them all to be the same and held exactly to the same standard. And I guess one little asterisk on that bit is not all advice is good advice. And so choosing who to listen to, knowing what good advice is that's I think that's the harder lesson to learn, and that's maybe can only be learned through experience. But just because it worked for somebody else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And my last bit is community is everything. From your friends, romantic partners, and family, whoever you choose to keep close to you and support you, whether or not they're also writers and artists and in the same industry or have nothing to do with that and just want to love and support you, having a support system in place is incredibly important. I have, there's a lot of reasons for this, and one is I write for I'm part of the Brooklyn Speculative Fiction Writers, and everyone there writes sci-fi, fantasy, horror, or some variety within that. And part of the reason it was formed is going to literary writing groups. You get a lot of people that, well, I hate this whole horror monster thing you're doing. Why can't you just do the same theme, but with, without all this weird stuff? It's best to get advice and feedback from people who understand what you're trying to do. And so having a writing community that gets you is really important. And it's also just, it's going to be, when it comes to networking, it's not about knowing somebody famous. It's all about knowing who your contemporaries are, people who are on the same level as you are, and trying to just genuinely support their work, and in return, hopefully you get the support as well. But like that community and maintaining that and investing your time into it, is such a important bit for it. And another reason for that too is the comics industry as a whole is very small. And one of the things that if you are a writer and you treat your artists poorly, you don't pay after getting your pages, or you're consistently late on major deadlines, things like that will get around. It's not quite everybody knows everybody, but it's not Hollywood level of production. So it is a smaller thing that you might expect from the outside looking in. And with that, community is where you're going to collaborate. Comics are a collaborative art form by nature. I know some people do all of it themselves. Other people do one little part, and the rest is delegated out. Some people do several parts of it, and in my case, I do the writing of the script and but I also do a lot of the publication side of it too, because I'm mostly self-published, working through Kickstarter, learning the business. So it's a thing where you're going to wear many hats, but it's good to get to know and how to work well with others, because you're not going to be able to do every step of the process on your own completely. So, and that's what I've got.
Thank you. I really appreciate the perspective too, of putting things in perspective. That not everyone's going to love someone's art or illustrations. I'm reminded of a fellow who once asked me, "Who's your favorite poet?" And I told him who it was, and he said, "He's not a poet. He's a minor poet." And I felt like, "Oh my gosh, you just crushed me." But putting things in perspective is important to keep you balanced as an artist. I dig you. All right. Well, who would like to go next? I don't want to pick on anyone. I feel like I should stick you because you're in the middle, Owen.
I'm fine with that. We can go with that.
Let's bring on the conch. All right, you're up there, Owen. 3 things you learned from comics, not comedians.
All right, I can help with that. So, when I was asked to sit on the panel, I realized after seeing my contemporaries tonight that I am really coming at this from the side of someone who is a fan, somebody who grew up and learned about comics through a passion of reading and escaping into them. And that's a lot of who I am as a person, as a kid especially. I did a lot of escapism through what I read, and I was a voracious reader. But I learned at an early age it was harder for me, growing up in the end of the 80s, early 90s, it was harder for me to find comics because I grew up in a small town in the middle of New York without a lot of access and also the economics that go with it. So the first thing that I learned about comics, and it still really rings true to me these days, is comics, much like everything else, is still about money too. And for me as a kid, I didn't have access to get to comics the way that I now marvel over. I live in Oneonta, where there's 3 comic book shops here in town, and I can get anything I want. I can order it to my house. I can get whatever I need. But back in the day, I didn't come from a space that could just have the easy access to that. So growing up with comics, my experience really was going to the public library and hoping they would have what I wanted to read, or just sucking it up and reading whatever was there. And that meant, it made it very different. For me, that made my comics, in many cases, that was more constant and current, the comics that would come through in the paper on every Sunday. And I was the type of kid that I got out there ahead of my parents and took that set of pages out and drifted off and away for the rest of the day. So for the perspective I have with comics are not just the, what's in vogue right now with comics, which is superheroes and that's in horror and sci-fi, but just your standard stories, things about people in their real lives or different things. The first time I did have access to a comic that I could call my own, it kind of relates to the fact that they relate to money. It is the comic I have with me tonight. It is this comic, which is Spider-Man and Storm and Power Man battling the smoke screen, which if anybody is ever familiar with this, you might be, because this is a Dare comic. This is a comic given out free to kids in school. This was my first level of being able to say, oh, I have one of these now. And I've kept it to this day because it's kind of a testament of how far we've come in terms of the cost of comics being more accessible. Right now, I can get any comic I want and regularly do online. And my collection is a digital style collection. That's for the most part of what I own. So the access is there now. So if you're still thinking, well, maybe I haven't thought about comics at this point, but I've heard some of the stories, I see some of the things that are now translated to TV and movies, and I'm thinking maybe I want to get into it, it is a great time to start to get into it. Second thing I learned and care about comics, it also came to me as I grew up and I'm older. I'm a parent now. And for me, one of the things I love about comics and that comics can do is comics are also a bridge between generations. I remember as a kid reading the Sunday comics, and then maybe when I got older, when I had money, actual money, I went and bought compilations, books of comics. And my first and one that I still love to this day is Scott Adams' Dilbert comics, which I never worked in an office as a high school kid, but I tell you what, I knew a lot about how offices worked based on the comics that I read there. And as well as all sorts of different comics beyond that. And now, owning many of those compilations and those books, I brought a couple with me, Dilbert one, and also Bucky's Big Book of Fun. I bring those because for me now, as a father, these sit on my shelves and they regularly move off of my shelves because my 2 children who are in the audience tonight, they take them and read them avidly. They're avid readers too. And it's been wonderful to see their love of the artistry, the stories grow alongside things that I love and that I know too. We can share a lot of that, and we share its translation from the page to the screen to the novelization, all sorts of ways. And so it's another thing that really, when we talk about community, I know you mentioned community, the community in your love of comics and the genre is really important too, and it can bridge all sorts of ages and backgrounds. The accessibility for multicultural backgrounds and diversity is grown in comics immensely in the last few years too. And that adds so many more voices to be able to be heard and for others to experience. One of the benefits to me with my children is that I can expose them to voices that are different than my own, that are coming from different backgrounds through comics, through other areas. But it's a great way to expose them and give them a chance to see it. But also with parenting, I'll get a good asterisk tip. Be sure you know what you're buying. It's great to let your kids loose in a comic book shop, but sometimes they'll come back with things that you have to say, no, not that, because that's content rated that I don't think is good for you. We've had that moment. We accidentally bought a comic with Starfire, who's a popular DC character, making out with a dolphin. Weird things happen in comic books too. So. That's the second thing. And the last thing I learned from comics, and I think it speaks to larger story crafting as well, is that I learned that your heroes are people too. I say that because in many cases, when you're reading about your heroes, whether or not their biographies, or you're watching documentaries on them, you kind of get this sensationalism of who they are, like all the highs, maybe some of the major lows, but it paints them in a picture that doesn't exactly give you the day-to-day. And one of the things I've loved about comics is comics, because of the vast amount of time and energy that people pay to the incredible work that they draw as well as they create in the storyline, you get a sense from many heroes what being a real person means to them alongside being a hero at the same time, or being the main character of their story. So as a great example, Spider-Man is very popular. And Peter Parker became popular in many ways because he exhibited the everyday attitude, the everyday person, the science geek that was in many people, that related in that the skills and the background and the history of maybe losing a parent, or losing a grandparent, all those pieces that made him real, made him feel like somebody you could know, someone from Queens that you could just go get a coffee with. And it still translates today, and it's many of the popular stories that are jumping off the pages today into popular culture. My last one visual is exactly what's really popular amongst Marvel right now, which is it's What If comics. It's one of my favorite comic series as well. And What If comics are great because it shows that comics can paint. You don't have to just follow the regular storyline, the regular timeline. Comics are allowed to go outside the edges and show you that heroes or characters are real people, because anything else could happen to them. Their lives could change because one simple thing was totally different. And that's who we are too. That's who people are. And I think that one of the reasons comics are so profound as an art form is because they paint the emotion, they draw you in, and they give you a lot of security in knowing that you as a real person can be experiencing those things, and it's okay to experience those things, even if people or characters are experiencing them even at a higher level. And that's one of the benefits, is that you can see yourself in the art form that way. And those are the big things that I have today.
Well, thank you. I like your intergenerational approach, where you're sharing with your children. And for me, it was baseball cards with my father, but that's beside the point. And the What If stuff is fun. This could be embarrassing. I didn't know that there was a comic that existed, but I do enjoy the Disney series. I mean, that's a hoot. It's a hoot. All right, Master Graphite, what do you have for us? 3 things you've learned about comics, not comedy.
Hi. I actually wanted to touch base on things that my colleagues said, because the access to comics is something that, throughout my growing up has been, it went from very scarce to very widely accessible among cultures and backgrounds and socioeconomic types. Growing up, I grew up in kind of the projects. I grew up in East Orange, New Jersey. I didn't get my first comic till 5th grade, and it was from a friend. And it was loosely bad translated comic of Weapons of the Gods, and I learned heavily from it. And it was probably one of my favorite comics, even though now that I read it as an adult, it's kind of very bad. But I did want to say, just because at where I am now, in terms of seeing these diverse voices, in whether it be in comic book writing, whether it be in storyboard art, whether it be in animation, whether it be the characters themselves. You know, as you mentioned Peter Parker, we now have Miles Morales, which is canon now, not a what if story. So I figured that is just important to mention, that like now that there are more faces that can be seen, and you know, like my face can be seen on a comic and stuff, whereas before it was very rare to find that kind of thing. But the first kind of thing I wanted to mention was that creating a story is like playing make-believe with your memories. This is coming from the perspective of a story crafter. Usually some of the best stories in cartoons, comics, animation, movies are done from, they're done from real life things. They're taken from real life things. One of my favorite shows growing up was, Ed and Eddie, which was done by Danny Anatucci. And it was basically an outrageous bunch of outcast kids trying to hustle and, make it happen. And it came from real stories about Danny Anatucci's childhood, where he grew up in a cul-de-sac, and, Kids Next Door, the same thing. Or, some of my favorite stories growing up, like, Wonder Woman obviously is not, it's kind of a, everyone can, write Wonder Woman, but, some people that have taken it, like Brian Michael Bendis, or some other people that I wish I could remember off the top of my head, have really personalized and put themselves in these characters, and like pulled from real things and turned it into like real, like amazing stories. And they become grounded and not outrageous in the sense of like, oh, you have a big tentacle monster, but what is that tentacle monster like representative of, like, in your life? And it is absolutely amazing how people can do those kinds of things. And I hope in my future stories that I can pull from real things and make an authentic story that's relatable and imaginative and wonderful to all ages. So my second thing is knowing the difference between good style and good writing and pacing. A good comic is a balance of both. I went to a lecture with Danny Araya from Castlevania, who's part of Powerhouse Animation on Netflix. It's a wonderful series. It is, if you're of age, I recommend you watch it. But the workshop talked about storyboard art, and what's different between storyboard art and comic book writing is just motions and extra panels. That's pretty much all it is. You're turning a story into animation. You're turning a story into a more visual novel that you can actually see. And Danny Araya mentioned that the best part about storyboard art is that you can pace it the way you want to. You can embellish things. You can make it as cool as you want to. You can make it as flashy as you want to. But if it doesn't have substance, or doesn't move the characters forward, or it, you don't have an A to B, it's not going anywhere. It's just all flash and lights and no like real substance. And that leads on to one of my other points of like knowing your voice. And knowing your voice is a very pertinent part about being an artist in general. If you don't necessarily know who you are or what you want to become, or when you're going into a project, like what's the skewer? What's your end goal into creating a project from start to finish, whether it be from comic book writing, storyboarding, art, writing in general. Like, you need to at least have an end goal. You at least want to have a purpose when you're telling these stories, and the rest will fall into place. And the last thing for me is probably the most important, but probably the most redundant, is one sequence at a time. Good stories are built with time and dedication. It takes a lot of work to make something amazing, and patience is key. As we've heard stories of time where people aren't accepting stories because this is your authentic vision. It's going to take time for the success that you want, whether you expect it to be a major comic release, a major show release, a web comic, a T-shirt, a sticker or anything like that. It's going to take time before you reach that mark where you can live off that kind of thing. And those of us who are in it for the right reasons aren't really in it for the money, but the bills are knocking, what I'm saying? You got to pay your bills and stuff. But but at the end of the day, it is very important to take care of yourself, take care of the things that are most important to you, and just take your time, do things and create a good story. Don't rush it, and don't try and make the next Avengers. Don't try and make, the next Keanu Reeves film that's going to be a big blast. Just make, your story could be the next big thing. And regardless of, what you think is a hit or not, it's going to take time for it to be a thing. So, yeah.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you. We have some questions here, Monica and myself, but we do want to reach out to some of the audience folks in a few moments. If you have questions, think about something, be ready to pitch it. Monica, what do you got first?
Well, it's interesting to me I told Rob, I know nothing about comics, but as the three of you were talking, I realized that I read the Sunday comics. As a kid, I read Scrooge McDuck, and now I have the compilations of The Walking Dead. I guess they're comics, I guess. Yep. So I guess I am a comic fan. But I think one of the things from a female perspective, and you all kind of mentioned it in different ways, is seeing yourself represented or being able to share with others. As a woman, sometimes I look at comics and I don't see an average woman. I see very voluptuous women who I don't know any. So, and yes, they're superheroes, but how do you find the comics that speak to you? And why are all the women always size 2, superheroes? I don't know if anybody, even if you want to tackle that one, but I guess more the question is, how do you find the comic that speaks to you?
Anybody want to take that?
Oh, I can start and.
We'll jump in. Don't worry. We'll jump in.
One of the I would start with I mentioned Goodreads before. There's lots of lists on Goodreads of I know there's novels written by women, but comics written by women. I would search for lists that are specifically best books that I do this all the time. It's how I find a lot of horror novels. Like I know I like creepy, weird horror, so I'm always like slasher stuff doesn't really do a lot for me, and so I will often do that. It's like comb through lists, and half the time I'll see a bunch of the same stuff that I've seen before, but that's usually tells me I'm on the right scent. And because there is a lot of great stuff out there, and you mentioned Walking Dead. Image Comics definitely is putting out some of the best examples of that, and I could name a few off the top of my head, depending on what you're looking for. But that's where I would start. Is look at the women who are creating comics, and that is probably going to be a starting point of how to get to where they are. And there's some really great stuff out there.
Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll jump in a little bit. Okay, so cool. I think going back to your point of why are they all like that, and again, doing a lot of timing research on. I've always viewed comics as what the culture is in the moment, because it is a tome of popular culture, and so that is unfortunately what was within popular culture for long periods of time, and it translated to advertising, it translated across the screen in film, and so I think now one of the benefits is, as we've moved forward, is that we are more open to more people from different backgrounds, body types, and really giving more regularity to even the heroes or the protagonists of their story. Some of my favorites are Kamala Khan from Marvel and Moon Girl and Devil Dino. There's fun out there now that kind of connects to people from different backgrounds and body types that they would not have been acceptable potentially in the editing room or the rooms previously. I think the best we can do is to recognize those, much like the lists that you had referred back to, is there's got to be a level of recognition to that and to what that change is like, and where it really is bringing more viewers and people who care about comics in. And I think there's a real appetite for that now too.
I guess I'd like to answer that question in a different sense. Well, if you look at the history of comics, they kind of always have appealed, well, toys and comics have always appealed to boys. And usually what sells, well, to straight boys, women. And then they kind of kept going on, and the cycle keeps going on. How do you make this sell? Like the thin waist, the voluptuous curves, the everything. A lot of times comics have been shown through history that, appealing towards boys, appealing towards women lovers, or male presenting boy women lovers. Those folks, comics like anything like by J. Scott Campbell, where you see that example of the super thin waist, the huge eyes, the voluptuous hair, and things like that. It's been like a really bad tradition, and I'm kind of very glad that it's kind of breaking, especially with the latest movements that have been going on, and it's just nice to actually have a more, like, it's more acceptable now that we can draw different things and show people like this is our standard of beauty or something like that, especially in voices of color, different levels of femininity or different levels of androgyny, if that's a word. But it's very hard to obviously you don't have to tell us, because we're a panelist of men, that women have been objectified for the last century or so. So it's kind of good that it's being toned down a bit. You are going to find more things, and you're going to find more mainstream things that are just more diverse, less objectifying, and just more fun. And yeah, so.
Well, I have to say, after hearing that answer, and I'm not being flippant, I want to go to one of our comic shops and dig deeper. So I really appreciate that you shared that and really are encouraging people to look. So I appreciate it. So, Rob.
There was a mention earlier about how some comics get, if they're fortunate, they get to the TV production or film production. But I would like to ask you all, is there a comic series that you feel has deeply and vastly been overlooked? And if you had the right or the opportunity to make it happen in film or TV, what is something that should, if it hasn't been there yet, it's a must-do in your opinions? What's something we should be looking for?
I brought mine with me, so I guess I'll go with it. So, I love the Get Fuzzy series. It is hilarious, and for people who love comedy with animals and giving voice to them, it's such a wonderful series because it follows a cat who, for lack of a better term, has lost its mind, and it's dog friend and their owner, and it's cute, it's innocent, it makes them. But also it puts them in situations that are hilarious. So if you're looking for that type of comic and you have not caught it in like Sunday morning comics or daily comics or anything like that, I highly recommend it. To me, it's one of these things that I have been thinking in the tones of Garfield that translated over into television. It's one of these things I've waited to find that somebody who was going to try to translate this into television, because I think they'd have have a really good opportunity on their hands.
Thank you, Owen. What has been overlooked that needs to be on the big screen or television?
For me, I would say the comic that actually inspired me to really start make my own comics was Digger. It is a black and white webcomic by Ursula Vernon. It's about a wombat that digs herself into a strange new world with dying gods and matriarchal hyena tribes, and she finds herself trying to teach morality to a shadow demon, a child shadow demon that doesn't know what he is, doesn't know what anything is, and so it's like all I can do is like guide this demon to not do harm, and like it's this super weird, super fun fantasy with elements of horror, and just it's definitely overlooked. It still managed to, once she finished it, it actually ended up winning a Hugo when she didn't even know she was eligible for it. When she got nominated, that one for me. I don't know how it would go over as a mainstream cartoon, or because it's very anthropomorphic, and I don't know how it would appeal to an audience, and I think it's fine. But that would be my one.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Master Graphite.
You still calling me master?
I like
I gotcha.
I'll get over it, Stefan. I'm sorry.
It's all right. I think it would have to be Kay O'Neill's The Tea Dragon Society. They have 3 books. The Tea Dragon Festival, Tea Dragon Society, and I forgot the last one. But when you see those books, they are magical. So in this world, tea dragons are literally named after the tea that we drink. You know, there's jasmine, there's green, there's hibiscus, all sorts of teas and stuff made into dragons. And this young girl comes across a jasmine dragon and learns the owner, and that used to be part of this ancient tradition called the Tea Dragon Society, and they take care of these dragons and appreciate these dragons in a spiritual sense, and it is a wonderful, heartwarming story that I would love to see animated, because her work is fantastic with color, with lines. I can't describe it well enough for you to see it. It just needs to be animated. Wow. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much. Hey, this is the time I want to reach out and touch someone in the audience, figuratively. Any questions for our panelists out there? Searching for any questions. Oh, hello. What's your name, please, and what's your question?
Hi, my name is Justine, and my question is, as you develop your characters, their look, their story, what are you learning about yourself? And what does it take for you to take that part of yourself and put it out into the world to share?
Who is that? You? Anybody want to take that before I jump in?
You
Okay. So I love doing characters. I have done characters since middle school. The most important thing about when you're doing your characters is that you got to put a piece of yourself into those characters. And it feels like whenever I make a character or do a certain collection, it seems like there's a piece of me authentically showing through them. When you're building a character, you kind of become like their parent in the sense where you're becoming them almost. Like you're trying to know how they work, how they live, how they put on clothes, how do they wear clothes, are they slouchy, that kind of thing. How do they do their hair? How do you do this? And it can be just like costuming in a way, but in the imagination and things like that. And I just really get into it, and I lose myself sometimes when making these characters, and it can get really fun. I can just get lost in it, but I don't know if I touched your question at all. You mind repeating?
Sure. The question was, are you learning anything about yourself as you develop them, and what does it take to share that part of yourself?
Oh, okay. So I'm learning that I can just sway like very hard into a character. And I love to just get lost in like the motion or the newness of this new character. And the hard thing about putting things out is that actually no, it's not that hard because it's honest. The hard thing is about facing rejection and things like that, but as long as you're holding on to your truth, any result, whether it be good or bad, it's fine because I put myself out there. I'm an artist. You don't like it? Okay. You do like it? I appreciate it, Yeah. So, anybody else?
For me, I know I come at writing. I used to do a lot of slam poetry and spoken word, and I had to step away from that because that was almost a too honest and too raw of presenting myself. And when you work with characters, you get to have some distance. It's someone else. It's not me. It doesn't have to happen the way it happened. And so that gives you, fiction is, in a way, gives you more room to be honest with some things that are really hard to be honest with in a very literal sense. And so for me, I think I'm just reflecting on some of the characters I've created. Sometimes they're, I guess a part of me ends up in any, especially protagonist character that I would have, but I've learned that I really like problematic female characters a lot. Just in terms of what I watch on TV, and the ones who really appeal to me. I like a really messy character. I like a character whose life is just in shambles because of their, and yet they still have something that keeps them going. And to me, I'm interested in that bit. And so it's character is like Stefan mentioned, getting lost in character. Character is the critical part of any good story. If you don't get character down, if you spend all your time in the world building and how the government society works in your sci-fi fantasy epic, and you get lost in all these minute details and you have cardboard characters, it's gonna fall flat. And so, and I think you see that a lot. Watch any sci-fi show from the last, I guess, before Battlestar Galactica, where you just had so many shows where they focused on, and it was a really cool idea that they just didn't, they plugged a generic character here. You've seen this archetype in every show you've ever watched. And so archetypes can be fun to lean into, but they're also really fun to subvert. And to me, I'll give one example of a show that failed in an interesting way that I really appreciate is Lost. Lost failed in its world building, but it succeeded in its characters. People were so invested in that show because of its characters. There was a mystery. The mystery was certainly there, but you were invested because of all these different characters that you were learning about their backstory and what brought them there. And even though the end bit was what was the smoke monster? There was a lot of questions that were not answered in a very satisfying way. But I was I kind of like how this show failed in a different way than most shows usually fail. Usually it's this world was so cool, but I hated the main character, and they got lost in this stupid romance plot, and Lost did none of that. And so I don't know. I appreciate things that fail in interesting ways too. So there's that.
I'm going to hit this from another side, but I will give another example of your cardboard characters. That is why the Maze Runner movies did not work as well as the books did, because they just left out all that really great character development. Yep. And that's a common thing that can in the adaptation phase is people, because you have to fit it into a certain box of time or space, you can lose that development of character that made something so popular to begin with. I don't draw because I hate to draw. But character building, I've done that for a lot of times through everything from video gaming to D&D. And I agree that for myself, I've learned is that I tend to play characters through catharsis or make characters for catharsis. So something that I would probably not do in real life, those are the characters I would tend to gravitate towards. And just kind of have that level of exposure and trying to have the mindset, what is it like in that shoe? And I think that, for me, that's where you do some learning as well, because you can see, well, how are you affected by that decision or that process and where they're going to end up along the way. I like doing that with a cast of characters too, because if you lose yourself in a character and you have a community of people around you who also lose themselves in those characters, it is a fun time.
Thank you very much. This is what we call the speed round. We ask our final question, and we hear from everyone on the stage. And we might even ask the audience on this one. I think that could be fun. So I'm going to ask the audience to kind of holler and tell us your favorite thing. What I'm going to ask in the speed round, and then we'll tell you a little bit more about the next gig. So the speed round question is simple. What is your favorite comic character of all time? All right. And so why don't we begin out there in the blue sweatshirt? Who is it?
Namor the submarine. I can pronounce Namor.
Namor.
Namor. All right. Mademoiselle.
Green Lantern.
Green Lantern. Right on. In the back.
I'm more of like a manga after reading after anime, so right now I'm reading Demon Slayer.
Right on.
I love all the characters.
Well, thank you very much. And over here in the front? Garfield. All right.
Swamp Thing.
Swamp Thing. Very good. All right. And then let's go around and hear from you.
I'm going to go to who I thought of when we originally proposed this topic, so he's still front of my mind, and that's Scrooge McDuck.
Scrooge McDuck. All right. Me, I'm a Doonesbury guy. I love Dr. Gonzo or Zonker. That's my thing, man.
I'm going to have to go with Velma from Scooby-Doo.
All right.
Monkey D. Luffy.
All right, right out.
I'm struggling with this. I've been bouncing around in my head. Swamp Thing is also one of mine, but I wanted to say something different. I would probably say the Demon Shadow Child from Digger is one of my favorites.
There we go. All right, well, thank you. On behalf of our guests, Daniel Stalter, Owen Conklin, Stefan Merville, I'm Rob Tebow with Monica Grau, and in 2 weeks we'll get together with some people at a location to be determined to examine 3 things I learned about owning a small business on October 14th at 7 p.m. location to be announced. On behalf of all our friends here and the good friends of Dave Giese and the students here in the production center of IRC Studio 111, we thank you and have a good night.